I think it's fair to say that today's police officers are being challenged in ways that we could not have imagined in years past. Police work has steadily become more demanding as video technology and social media have dramatically increased transparency. As a result, the degree of public participation in government has grown. The communities we serve now insist on higher levels of responsible policing and accountability. And today's officers are being asked to become more compassionate and to employ only constitutionally compatible tactics. Now, despite what you might have heard, this is a challenging and exciting time to be a cop. The changes we make now will foster new and creative ways to help instill safety and prosperity into our communities. In the wake of public outcry for more police accountability, many behavior solutions and technology prescriptions are being offered. Now, this includes everything from blocks of instruction on tactical communication to body-worn cameras. Now, I'm sure all of us have seen how body-worn cameras can be helpful, but they can also help to illustrate the deepest problems in policing. This is the realization that invites us to look deeper than behavior and consider the underlying mindsets of the officers whose questionable actions have been captured on video and become more fuel for anti-police sentiment. At a basic level, any organization's results are driven by the collective behaviors of those in the organization. This is why police agencies spend so much time and so much effort trying to encourage productive behaviors on the part of their employees. However, behavior itself is driven by something else, by the underlying mindsets in the organization. Now, when I'm using this term mindset, I'm meaning it to be a comprehensive term that includes one's belief about oneself in relationship to others. Your mindset is the lens through which you see your work, your relationships, your entire world. There are essentially two different mindsets that a person can have at any given time, an inward mindset and an outward mindset. Now, when I speak of this inward mindset, this mindset is basically an exclusive focus on one's own goals and objectives, without regard for the impact of one's behavior on others. This mindset is blind to what others need and is therefore prone to creating conflict. Alternatively, the outward mindset includes a focus on the needs and objectives of others. When people work with an outward mindset, they work to help others be successful, their coworkers, their peers, the community, and the organization as a whole. The shift from an inward to an outward mindset can bring about deep and far-reaching changes in a person's behavior and the success of an organization. When I was a newly minted police officer, I was assigned to the city's west side. Now, this neighborhood was deeply burdened with volume crime for decades and populated by mostly Hispanic residents. Undocumented workers, undocumented immigrants riding the rails from Texas would detrain behind a liquor store near a main intersection. Now, most of these men came looking for work, but many of them were criminals who preyed upon members of the public and people in the neighborhood. The liquor store became an ad hoc gathering place for day laborers looking for work, and these criminals, they mingled among them, hiding in plain sight. The men had no restrooms, so they urinated and defecated in the streets. And many of these men could be seen stripping naked at night and using garden hoses in people's backyards to shower and to wash off. Now, most of the men not picked up for work on a given day spent their time getting drunk and making problems for other people in the community. These men hung around and preyed on the day laborers when they returned with their cash pay for the day. Because these victims were illegal immigrants or had low trust relationships with the police, most of these crimes went unreported unless the victims were left laying bloody in an alley. Now, given the high call volume, we weren't able to spend a lot of time proactively in the neighborhood, so we just resorted to responding to calls for service, making arrests, and taking reports. With each call and each arrest, my mindset became more and more inward. Over time, I began to see the people in the neighborhood differently. I resented responding to calls for service and found it easier to just accept that the neighborhood and the people in it were hopeless. People who obeyed the law became irrelevant to me. They simply didn't matter to me unless they wanted to talk to me. If they wanted to talk, then I saw them as nuisances and obstacles to the accomplishment of my job. I eventually joined the SWAT team, and we were brought in to clean up the West Side. Our strategy was simple: zero tolerance enforcement of even the most minor of violations. We wrote tickets and made arrests for every infraction, no matter how small. But no matter how hard we worked, the situation continued to worsen until we finally conceded and just moved on to other missions, leaving the patrol officers to deal with the aftermath. This approach is illustrative of the inward mindset. When operating from an inward mindset, people tend to focus exclusively on their goals and objectives. They expect others to behave in ways that further their objectives, or else stay out of the way. When operating from an inward mindset, if what I do is not productive, I simply blame all the obstacles I've encountered and move on. A few years later, I was promoted and I had the opportunity to lead a SWAT team of my own. Now, when I inherited this team, it was going through some tough times. There were complaints of discourtesy and unnecessary property damage, and the outgoing supervisor had been fired on the heels of excessive force allegations. Morale was low, and the prevailing view of the team was that the high-risk population we served represented all that was wrong with the city. Now, this team was productive in the classical sense, serving hundreds of search warrants a year and making numerous felony arrests each day. But, however, we also had the dubious distinction of being the most complained-on team on the entire department. The individual team members wanted nothing more than to make the city safer, but an inward focus failed to help us see how counter-purposeful our tactics were. A couple of years into my tenure with the team, we encountered the ideas of the Arbiter Institute. It was through a partnership with the Institute that we began to conceive of our work differently. As we became more and more aware of the impact of our behaviors on others, we began to ask questions of ourselves. Questions like, what would it be like to be policed by officers like us? At the level of what we were doing, we weren't all that different from any other SWAT team operating in the country. We served high-risk search warrants, we broke down doors, and we made arrests. But as our mindset became more and more outward, we began to distinguish ourselves at the level of how we were with people and what we did. As our mindset became outward, the team totally transformed before my eyes. Let me illustrate this transformation with a couple of stories. At one point, we were serving between 300 to 500 high-risk search warrants a year. Now, we executed these warrants in neighborhoods with varying demographics, but despite the differences in the people we would encounter, some things were the same. For instance, many of these people were dog owners. Now, as you can imagine, dogs aren't particularly fond of people breaking down the door and rushing into their homes. It wasn't uncommon for us to be confronted with an aggressive dog and for that dog to be shot on the spot. People were often more upset about their dogs being shot than they were about the raid itself. One day, a team member contemplating this situation from an outward mindset asked this question of the rest of the team. If we could kick in your house without shooting your dog, would you want us to? Now, most of the team members have dogs of their own, so you can imagine the answer. This one question led us to embed a dog expert with the team who would come along with us on raids to see how we did our jobs. Once he understood the context and how we would encounter dogs, he helped design behavior that we implemented to help reduce the shooting of dogs on these search warrants. Basically, we understood more about dog behavior we were able to recognize when they were a threat. Another team member researched technology that helped us restrain and capture aggressive dogs without resorting to deadly force. Now, when we undertook this initiative, we wanted to reduce the number of dogs that we shot, and I got to tell you, it was a remarkable success. The numbers of dogs shot on raids for our team dropped over 80% in the first year alone. Let me share another story with you that illustrates this outward mindset way of policing. One day we were asked to serve a warrant on behalf of the homicide unit. They were looking for 2 murder suspects who were believed to be occupying a residence on the east side. We went to the unit and conducted all our typical prep work. However, we weren't able to station surveillance crews on the block due to the high level of foot traffic. So the rest of the team and I got tacked out, we jumped in the van, and we headed to the objective. We were about 2 blocks out when lookouts on the block made us and began running to the house to warn the residents we were coming. I alerted the rest of the team and let them know we were compromised, and I instructed the breacher to take the door down. The breacher took the door off the hinges, and we deployed a couple of flashbangs in strategic areas to mask our movement through the doorway. Now, what we encountered on the other side of that threshold was complete pandemonium. There were approximately 20 people in the house, and they were running and scurrying in every direction, diving under beds, jumping in closets. We literally had little children clinging to our legs as we made our way through the structure. We detained the 2 suspects we were looking for, and we consolidated everyone else into a dining room that had been furnished with 2 couches. After the house was clear, I set about the process of trying to explain to people why we were there. We had some mothers with some screaming infants, and I could barely be heard over the chaos. It was about that time that I noticed my point man was missing. Now, I imagined he'd gone somewhere off into the house, found a quiet spot from which to call the detectives, so I went searching for him. I walked into the kitchen, and I spotted him standing at the sink with his back to me. When I walked over to him, I could hardly believe what he was doing. Here was this tough guy with probably 1,500 high-risk warrant services under his belt, standing at the sink mixing baby bottles. Our eyes met, and he kind of smiled at me and shrugged. Then he walked out to the dining room and began distributing these baby bottles to the mothers of the crying infants. The whole scene shifted. Everyone calmed down, and we were able to sort out who was who before the detectives entered the home. These examples illustrate the transformative power of outward mindset. These examples these stories that I share with you are powerful precisely because they're so surprising. We don't typically imagine SWAT officers stopping in the middle of a raid to mix up baby bottles. And it's not just that most SWAT officers would choose not to mix up baby bottles, it's that the thought would never occur to them in the first place. When operating from an inward mindset, the thought of mixing up baby bottles or being considerate about how others feel about their pets would never even enter their consciousness. Let me take you back to the West Side, where two officers there begin to implement the same kind of mindset strategy to change things dramatically. When the smoke cleared on the zero tolerance enforcement strategy, the main responsibility for policing the West Side fell to two officers assigned to a community action center. Now, at first, these officers employed some of the same mindset strategies or some of the same strategies that we employed years before. However, they soon became frustrated with the lack of results and began to question the closed-minded approach. They began to ask questions of their own, like, what would it be like to be in a country where you didn't speak the language, where you had no place to live, where you couldn't find consistent work, and where you had no place to go to the restroom? Asking questions like these invited them to undergo a change in not only the way they saw the challenges of the neighborhood, but the way they saw the people as well. They ceased to focus primarily on their own objectives and began working in a way that was considerate of the impact of their behaviors on others. With the help of a well-known community advocate, they began by opening up the community center so that the day laborers who gathered near the center could use the restroom facilities. Then next they pooled their money and they began keeping a pot of beans on the stove and brewing coffee for the men who tentatively gathered near the center. They directed the men who wanted to seek work for the day to respond to the community center, and those that weren't picked up for work on a given day willingly volunteered to go out into the neighborhoods and perform community service work, like cleaning up the yards of elderly residents. These two officers worked right beside the men, clearing brush, painting fences, and even helping neighborhood matriarchs make tamales. All these things helped the officers to build trusting relationships, and these relationships became the foundation to help instill safety, a sense of community, and eventually prosperity into the community. Over time, crime began to fall drastically as trust between the public and the police improved. Community members began cooperating with police investigations, and soon the criminals had nowhere to hide. Today, the West Side is a prosperous neighborhood with low crime rate and high levels of cooperation. Outward mindset officers intentionally perform their work in a way that is considerate of what other people are trying to accomplish. These officers measure their success not in terms of what they themselves are able to do, but what others are able to accomplish because of their efforts. Now, today's challenges certainly require many changes in actions and behaviors. As we've discussed, any organization's results are driven by the collective behaviors of those in the organization. While this is true, this concept is incomplete and therefore fundamentally misleading. That's because behavior choices are driven by something deeper than behavior, which is to say that behavior itself is driven by this deeper, determining factor. So long as there exists a gap between the desired behaviors of members of an organization and the mindset of the organization, attempts to get people to change behaviors will be resisted, twisted, complained about, undermined, and eventually discarded and forgotten. This is why potentially helpful behavioral training so often fails to deliver on its promised results. Any attempts to prescribe behaviors that do not comport with the underlying mindsets of those in the organization will necessarily fail. Any positive changes will be marginal rather than transformative. And the potentially helpful ideas that we've seen will tend to fade away as just the latest flavor of the month. When this concept is accepted, agency leaders will realize that changes in their organizational results are bounded by their changes in their own mindset. Leaders must learn to be alive to the needs of the men and women who report to them and structure their work in a way that is considerate of what their reports are trying to accomplish. When agency leaders develop and implement an outward mindset toward their employees, leading broader organizational change becomes intuitive. Once you sufficiently improve the prevailing mindset, either of an individual or an organization, you no longer have to manage many of the behaviors that before you thought would have to be mandated. As mindset changes, so does behavior, without having to prescribe it. And where you still need to prescribe it, the changes won't be systematically resisted. Officers operating with an outward mindset are intensely curious about members of their community, their hopes, needs, burdens, trials, and fears. They are relentlessly learning and adapting to be more helpful to help things go right. They use the enforcement of laws and the power to arrest only in the service of protecting the constitutional rights and personal safety of others. These officers follow up to verify how effective changes have been and to further improve service in the future. Every bit of change and growth we aspire to as a profession is dependent upon a change in mindset. This is because every choice is made from the context of the mindset of the person who is choosing. Now, you've heard the speakers before me today speak about humility. This type of outward mindset thinking is rooted deeply in humility. A couple of years ago, I was visiting the Naval Special Warfare Training Center in Coronado, California. I was speaking to Captain Bill Wilson, the commander in charge of all Navy SEAL training worldwide. Captain Wilson asked me to elaborate on the qualities I thought were essential to success in unconventional warfare. I told the captain that I thought they were the same qualities that were essential to success at any challenging endeavor: humility and the ability to adapt to change. I further said, look, without humility, we can't even recognize the need to adapt. Captain Wilson said he could not agree with me more. He went on to point out that the eagle on the Navy SEAL trident presents with a bowed head as a reminder that humility is the most important quality of a warrior. The environment in which law enforcement officers work is undergoing fundamental changes, as are the expectations of the people we serve. Law enforcement organizations populated by people who have more or less the same mindset as they've always had will continue to achieve more or less the same results they've always achieved. Behavior changes alone can bring about marginal improvements, but the kind of breakthrough results we're looking for require a change in mindset. Thank you.
Hi, this is Roy Bethke from the Virtus Group and co-founder of WINx. I want to thank you for taking the time to watch this video, and I'm hopeful that you found it valuable. Our goal with WINx is to encourage each of us in the profession to think, train, prepare, behave, lead, and live differently. For that to happen, we need your help. If you found the video helpful in any way, please take a moment to share it. You can do that on social media, especially Facebook and Twitter, on the internet, or within your network of like-minded people. Also, we have similar videos available from all of our events. You'll find them posted on the Virtus Group YouTube page. We think the videos are a great tool for learning, but feedback has told us that there is nothing better than being at a WINx event in person. 9 presenters, 18 minutes each, designed to inspire and engage the audience. To get more information about our next WINx event, including location, cost, and registration, please visit www.experiencewinx.com. You can also find us on Facebook at facebook.com/experiencewinx or on Twitter at AskWinx. Until next time, be safe and remember life's most powerful question: what's important now? Thank you.